This session is called From Many Paths to the Creator, a Common Path to Social Justice. We will be presenting a conversation between and among key leaders within the faith community who have devoted their lives' work to advocating for social justice. We are joined today by three speakers who, by all accounts, are among the most knowledgeable and practiced social justice advocates within the faith community. Let me take a few moments to tell you something about each of these individuals. Sister Simone Campbell has served as Executive Director of Network, a Catholic social justice lobby since the year 2004. She is a religious leader, an attorney, a poet, with extensive experience in public policy and advocacy for systemic change. In Washington, she lobbies on issues of peace building, immigration reform, healthcare, and economic justice. Around the country, she is a noted speaker and educator on these public policy issues. Excuse me. In 2012, Sister Simone was instrumental in organizing the Nuns on the Bus. How many people saw that on television and in the papers? It was a huge... I don't think I have to say anything more. It was an avalanche of positive responses. I thank you for that. Our next speaker is Reverend Jim Wallis, who is the president and CEO of Sojourners, an organization with a 40-year history of nonpartisan leadership, building alliances, and mobilizing people of faith on racial and social justice issues, life and peace, and environmental stewardship. Reverend Wallis is a best-selling author, excuse me, public theologian, and frequent speaker on faith and public life. He is the author of 10 books, including the New York Times bestseller, God's Politics. He also serves as editor-in-chief of Sojourners magazine, whose combined print and electronic media have a readership in excess of 250,000 people. Reverend Wallis recently served on the White House Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Global Agenda Council on Values of the World Economic Forum. If the name implies a lot of activity, that's good. And finally, Rabbi Steve Gutow. I'm going to tell you about him as if you didn't know. We're going to pretend he's a newcomer here, okay? He's the president and CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. Rabbi Gutow is a lawyer, a rabbi, and an activist, and above all, he's a good friend of mine. He is a graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Council and has been named to the Forward 50 in the Newsweek Daily Beast list of the most influential rabbis in the U.S. in 2009, 2010, and 2012. What happened to 2011 is a question. Bad year, okay. It's like, why didn't you bring up I got 98, what happened to the 2 points, right? Rabbi Gutow is going to moderate this session, and he will lead what I am sure will be a thought-provoking conversation among our three participants. Rabbi Gutow?
Thank you, Edith, very much. Means a lot. I want to say two things as we get going. One is, I feel so fortunate to have these two wonderful people next to me. I mean, these are Gedolim. Gedolim means the big people in the field of faith and social justice. And these are two friends of each other and of mine, but these are also mentors of mine. I love watching what they do, and I love trying to make sure that our community does what they do. So I feel fortunate to sit between them, and I think all of you should feel that that's who we're talking to today. These are the Hachamim of the Talmud, the wise sages. Second of all, this is going to be a fairly freewheeling conversation where people just talk and get back and forth with each other. And it should be easy. Now, I don't know Sister Simone and Jim. I don't know, and I'm going to call them Jim and Simone and Reverend Wallis. I'm just going to do it how it comes out. But I just want you both to understand that interrupting in Jewish life is just part of saying hello. So if you feel like interrupting each other, you just go at it, okay? Don't feel like we should be too proper. So those are the ground rules. I wanted, because I think all of us know that the 50 communities represented here from all over the country are what they are. We know what JCPA is, and we all know who I am because we're probably sick of finding out who I am. I was going to ask Jim and Sister Simone to each talk a little bit about themselves and network, and we're talking 2 or 3 minutes because I don't think you actually know those things. So Sister Simone, you begin.
Okay. Well, I am Sister Simone Campbell. I'm glad to know you know Nuns on the Bus, but let me tell you some of the deeper story about who we are. Network was founded 41 years ago next month to work for economic justice. And we were started by 47 Catholic sisters who came together in response to our bishop's letter saying that an essential element of faith is not just the charity, the giving of alms, but rather is the working for justice to prevent the needs that we were responding to in direct service. And so they formed a network. Now the old-timers on Capitol Hill called us the Nuns Lobby, but fairly quickly we became a much broader organization that represents I call it the Catholic People's Movement, but now it's becoming a small c when I say Catholic because we have folks who share our values, share our commitment to the common good, and who have joined us. Last summer we did do Nuns on the Bus, which was an amazing explosion of opportunity to lift up the needs of those at the margins of our society. And it was a direct response to the Vatican censure of Catholic sisters. You might have recalled that. It happened 4 days after we had our 40th anniversary party, where the big question was, how do we get the name of Network known? How can we spread our mission? And so using a biblical image from Genesis, for me, the Spirit breathed over the waters of chaos. And out of that came our desire to use our notoriety for mission. And it came to me in prayer to ask for help. And that's what we did, was ask for help, and then somebody came, and nobody remembers who exactly first said road trip, but it was...
not roadkill, though,
not
right?
roadkill, no. Well, it could have been that, but praise God it wasn't. But the result was our 2-week-long, 2,700-mile, 9-state journey to 32 communities to lift up the horror of the Ryan budget, to say that there's an alternative, and it's the faithful budget, which is reasonable revenue for responsible programs. And that way forward was what we promoted, and as a result, we got a fair amount of notoriety. So it is about doing the mission at all times, and sometimes it is more electric than others. The last thing I would say is that we are working on, the issues that we do work on are economic justice, immigration reform. We do some work around gun violence and climate, but healthcare expansion is the other big thing that we're working on at this point to make sure the Affordable Care Act is fully implemented in all states. So that's a bit about who we are, and then we can cover the rest in conversation.
It's good. It's a good beginning. And Jim, now you go for it. You have a lot of good stuff to tell us.
Well,
in 2 or 3 minutes.
It's always good to be with two of your favorite people on the planet when you start Monday morning, so that's good. But I didn't realize, I knew, but I didn't remember you're both lawyers. And my 14-year-old happened to ask me last week, Dad, how many times have you been arrested? So I had to count them all up, and it was 22 times, I think. So I'm a little nervous with 2 lawyers on the panel.
Hey,
here,
we're the helper bees.
We're the
helper bees.
That's right.
Or we want to go get arrested with you.
That's right. Faith and social justice has really been what I've focused on in every way that I can. Last night was a great night because I'm a Little League baseball coach, and we had our draft last night. It's really funny when you're drafting 9 and 10-year-olds, and someone, in the second round, the Tigers take, and pass me a beer, So, but the nice thing about our Little League, is all the kids make the team, every kid, and the draft is to make the teams balanced, so no team runs away with it. So it's social justice again. Sojourners started as an intentional community in this town a long time ago. We're about 40 years old as well. And we lived in one of the toughest neighborhoods in DC and tried to live our lives as a community. Now we're kind of an extended community all over the country and around the world. I would say we're a network, we're a movement, we're all kinds of people in all kinds of places who are trying to, our mission statements, put their faith into action. Faith doesn't mean much unless you put it into action. What you believe is interesting, but what you do shows how much you believe what you say you believe. And so that's what we try and do. And so right now we're in the middle of, I'll just say 2 issues. What I call the battle for our fiscal soul, the sequester, and immigration. And we're about to start a book tour on April the 1st. It's a book I'm pretty excited about. It's called On God's Side, What Religion Forgets and Politics Hasn't Learned About Serving the Common Good. It's a book about the common good and how in Christian, Jewish, Islamic, and democratic secular traditions, the common good is a deeply, deeply ancient idea, but so timely. The common good is failing in the sequester. You can see it's failing. But in immigration reform, it's working. I'm seeing a whole debate going on. We were at the White House on Friday with the president, 12 interfaith leaders for about an hour and over an hour. And that's working, and yet the sequester isn't working. So why some things work and other things don't might be a good topic for our conversation this morning. So I'm pleased again to be here with 2 of my dearest friends who I respect so much. So thank you.
Thank you. And before that actually is a great topic, Jim, but before we go there, I wanted to ask each of us, which includes myself, but a lot of people say, what is it in our theologies? What is it that's in our view of God and how God sees the world that makes us feel that we have to do the work we do for the poor, or the work we do for the sick, the health care, or the work we do for the stranger, for immigrants? And I think I know we have different challenges from within, the challenges to the Jews that think that they were supposed to do universal social justice is, why are you doing universal social justice? Why aren't you doing social justice for Jews? Or why are you doing it at all? And I know that you have challenges from both of your hierarchy. No, not you. About why are you doing anything more than this or that on these issues? And so what is it about your vision of God's calling and the challenges to it that causes you to say, this is what Christianity teaches me, and this is why I think, sir or ma'am, probably more sir, but this is why I think you're wrong, and this is why I think this is where we have to go. I can say it, and I'll just say it quickly to give you an idea. I think in Judaism, the call for universality, it's synthesized and it's just straight through the tradition. I think we are a commanded people, and whether we're Orthodox or quite liberal like I am, those commands say take care of the poor, and they say take care of the stranger, and they say make sure you love the stranger, which is a lot to do in a world where love is so hard to find. I think our theology is clear that we have a job to do, and it's not about Jewish poor, it's about all poor. And it's not about the atrocities against Jews in the world, but it's about atrocities against Sudanese and Darfuris and all the work that we do. It's nonstop. And I also think as Jews, we have a history, and that history says that when people don't stand up, others get hurt. It certainly happened to us, and it's certainly going to happen to others. And I suppose when I think of the last thing, I usually say to those that say, how come you're doing a rally for the budget when there's problems with Hezbollah? And I go, well, we have to kind of do both. And I go, we do it because that's what God told us to do. We do both, we balance, we're not stupid. So I think we can do it. We can, I guess the old Gerald Ford line, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I guess I'll turn it first to you, Jim, and then to you, Sister Simone. Simone, and give us your theology and how it got you to where you are.
Well, the word here is theology. And I would encourage any group like this, when you come out with what you're saying afterwards, that it not just be a long list of things you care about, issues, kind of a laundry list. Tell people why your theology requires you to speak and to act, why your faith makes this necessary, as you were saying, because that's the issue finally, not the issues that we have opinions about, but why we feel the way that we do. And it's very simple. There was a lawyer, I think a Washington lawyer, who asked Jesus once, well, what's this about? And he talked about two things. You love God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. You love your neighbor as yourself. Now, think about that last one, loving your neighbor as yourself. That really means that as much as I love my two boys, 14 and 9, that I need to love other people's kids as much as I love my own kids. If you're a parent, think about that. That is the theological foundation for the common good for us. Yesterday, or Friday, in the meeting with President Obama, the head of the National Association of Evangelicals, Leith Anderson, says to the president, he says, President, we notice the scriptures talk about 3 kinds of love. Loving God, loving your neighbor, and loving a stranger. That's what it says. The common good really is the foundation for all this, and the test of it. The biblical prophets always said the test of the common good is how we treat the most vulnerable. It's not our gross national product. It's not our, our firepower or the influence of our culture. It's how we treat the most vulnerable. That's the test. And so I think the more people like us sound just like we're political, these are our issues, I think we kind of lose something. So I want to encourage us to be more and more and more theological in what we're saying and why we're saying it. These things are because of our faith, not just because of our politics.
Well, that's interesting. I would encourage a similar values kind of conversation, but I worry when we get too inclusive with our, because it assumes either it assumes I've got my gaggle of people behind me. We tease in community when somebody says, oh, we think this, and so our tease is, do you have a mouse in your pocket you're speaking for? Speak for yourself. So we try at least to speak more personally, individually, about what motivates me. But I totally agree on the speaking of the motivation, why we care about these things. And I mean, quite frankly, Christianity is a Judeo-Christian tradition, and so I look to the prophets, to Isaiah, to Micah, one of my strongest images is of Ezekiel in the Valley of the Dry Bones, and the fact that our nation is so hungry for some spiritual nourishment, the breath, some sinews, some flesh on this very dry bones of our political discourse, which I think is what you're speaking to, Jim. Mm-hmm. And that, so for me, but the key image in the Christian tradition is the Apostle Paul saying that we're one body. We're in this together. And nobody can be left out of the body. And the other day I stubbed my toe really bad, and I had one of those black nails, But how painful just having a little toe is. And I thought, isn't that the truth for our society, our world? That if there is one place where there is significant suffering, the whole body is thrown off kilter. And so we see that all the time in our cities. I mean, this whole epidemic of gun violence, this horror of fear of the other, the fears that go around of the stranger that you're talking about, Jim. I mean, all of this is crippling our whole body. And so for me as a person of faith, I speak of my faith, but I think the place where we meet in our pluralistic culture is the Constitution. And then I think we can say the we. But it's that speaking personally of my values then brings me to share with you whatever brings you to that center place.
No, they're both good, and I think they're both part of the whole answer that we have to. But I guess, and I know I'm speaking for a lot of the people in this room, and they're going to want the wisdom of your experience. We face all the time, I do, people who say, why are you doing X, Y, and Z when you could be doing these issues that are more directly you're responsible for, whether it be Jewish issues or whether it be, for me, or whether it be, whatever the Catholic hierarchy says, abortion or whatever. How do you respond to that? Because I think you could help all the people in this room, because they face that within their communities. And everyone believes in the prophets, or most of the people in this room think the prophets really are kind of the leaders of Jewish thought, but there are people that don't see it quite that way. And how would you respond, and how would you do it? You must face it, both of you. I know you face it. So we'll go back the same way, Jim and then Simone.
Well, I'm going to go back to the test. It's easy for us to always speak of our own interests. That's the easiest thing to do. But again and again, the prophets and Jesus too says, how you treat the least of these. Jesus says, this is how you treat me. And what's converting, I'll give you an example, what's converting evangelicals on immigration is what you said a while back, the Bible tells me so. That's what's changing them. These are evangelicals who talk about the Bible a lot, what I believe about the Bible. But they're actually reading their Bibles now, and they're seeing all the Hebrew scriptures about the stranger, how you treat the stranger, and they're seeing Jesus saying, as you treat the stranger, that's how you treat me. And I'll take it that way. So we've got two signs up at our border to Mexico, two invisible signs. One says, no trespass. The other one says, help wanted. And in between those two signs are 11 million very vulnerable people who are now, whatever you think about the issue, they are in the biblical category of the stranger. That's who they are. So when evangelicals figured out that's how we treat Jesus, it's converted people. It's converted people. And so it's converted them over their politics. So you know who joined us in this evangelical immigration table? The Southern Baptist joined us. They were there on Friday. That's helpful when you're working in the South with Southern senators, when Southern Baptists have identified their top priority as immigration reform. It's because of what the Bible said to them. So I'm going to keep going back. I agree, in a pluralistic nation, we always say religion has no monopoly on morality. That's absolutely important. And we come to the issue wanting to win the debate about the common good. We don't say we get to win because, Dr. King never said, I get to win because this is a Judeo-Christian country and I'm a religious leader. He never said that. He wanted to win the debate on the common good, but he wasn't afraid to lift up Jeremiah or Jesus. He said why he was in this, but then he knew he had to win the debate, And we have to win the debate about immigration, about the budget. We have to win the debate about these basic issues, but we got to know where we're coming from ourselves, and I think that's what really changes the faith community. The evangelicals wouldn't have been changed by a political argument. They were changed by reading their Bibles about what the stranger means for them.
I agree.
People don't ask me that question. The bishops sort of did, in criticizing us for working too much on issues of poverty and not enough on their issues, but our mission is to work on economic justice. And so I figure if the bishops are criticizing us for doing our mission too much, that's kind of a badge of honor. So I took it as a good thing. The fact is, and maybe it's because I was beginning to think maybe guys have different issues than women about this stuff. For me, I find more that people are surprised we have a tax policy, that we believe in reasonable revenue and that taxation, and we have to be responsible. And it goes back to Jim's point about if we're going to care for those who are poor, we have to be responsible and pay for it. It's not like you just got a credit card. So we say that an essential element of our message about protecting those at the margins of our society is we have to be responsible as a nation. And if we believe in something, for me, my faith says, then we're responsible for future generations. It's also constitutional to protect it for us and for our posterity. So a tax policy, and here I'm lobbying y'all, We're
really,
used to it. Yeah, I'm sure you are. Is really an important piece to be responsible for what we care about as a nation. And that it's easy to say, oh, fund this, but if we're not willing to do the hard part of working out how, then I think we're being kind of irresponsible. And my faith says that we've got to, a saying of Jesus is wise as serpents and guileless as doves. And so somebody applied that to us Catholic sisters, you know, trying to be wise as serpents. So we have to have tax policy that's sort of serpent-esque. And then we need to really reach out and care for those at the margins.
All right, so with that said, and we're all in the same world, and we're all responsible people, all of us here, the three of us for sure, you know, with the budget as a social justice document, which is a moral document, which was what all of us say and all of us believe, but how do we respond to the idea that, hey, there's also a need for people in this culture, in this society, politically as well as probably even morally, to have enough means and to feel like they have control of the income they bring in. There's a balance, and people want to hear about that balance. I mean, you know, a Congressman Ryan said that this was Catholic social teaching, and he backed off once the bishops spoke up.
No, he didn't. He kept saying it.
I thought he tried to. I thought he said it less loudly. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Said it to me. That was enough.
I'm sorry. With that said, how do we talk to those people who say, you can't just tax us to death, and they're probably right, and they're certainly politically right.
U.S. folks have never been taxed to death. I mean, if it was that case, our economy would have crumbled. The fact is that between 1949 and 1979, when there were double the top tax rate right now, the economy grew at 100%, and income distribution was approximately 100% across all quintiles, so that the top 20% grew by 86%. Now you really know I'm a lobbyist too. I'm being wonky, but the top 20% grew by 86%. The bottom grew by 116%. But we all know that a percentage of a bigger number creates a bigger number, so the top grew more in dollars. But you know what's happened between 79 and 2009? The top 20% has grown 50%. The bottom 50% has lost 7%. I mean, that's outrageous in 30 years. And the fact is the top 1% grew by 170%. Now, I don't believe anybody's going to be taxed to death. Because you know what? Taxes are on the amount above the marker levels, above the $250,000 or above the $400,000. So I believe most people could probably live fairly well on $250,000 and not be able to, you know, go on food stamps. I mean, it's just outrageous. Okay, and while I'm on a roll, the other piece that's just drives me nuts is that the bottom 20% are seen as the takers, or the bottom 47% are seen as the takers. The fact is, the majority of those low-income people are working, and they're working at minimum wage. And some of you have seen my clips on the internet. Well, my example, Exhibit A, is Billy and his family in Milwaukee, who are working. They're both working. Both parents are working. They're taking care of their two kids, but they're only making minimum wage, and then Billy's hours were cut back. So they're living in poverty, and they only have enough money to keep a roof over their heads and not food on the table. So putting food on the table, they use food stamps during the day, and they go to St. Benedict's dining room at night. And after talking to Billy, I realized, oh my heavens, food stamps in St. Benedict's dining room? People could say that's a handout to Billy, but you know what? It's a handout to the employer, because the employer has a fed employee at low wages. And then I realized, oh my heavens, it's a handout to the consumer, because the consumer pays less because the employer is paying lower wages, or the employer is gouging the consumers. I couldn't investigate that. But theoretically, it's keeping costs low. So we are all benefiting from Billy's struggle, and we're all benefiting from food stamps. We've made a choice as a nation to have a safety net, not to have living wage. And the living wage, right now, minimum wage is $7.25 nationally. Different states have different rules, but $7.25, it'd have to be $12.50 to have the same buying power it did in 1970. I mean, this is outrageous. Not that I have any feelings on the subject.
No, you're just, we don't want to get to you when you're really intense and passionate. Jim, I know you have strong feelings
So
on
this
this
is, again, let's go back to what the Hebrew prophets said, what the scriptures say, is prosperity is okay as long as we're all sharing it. All right? So let's apply that to these two periods of time that Simone's talking about. There was great prosperity following the Second World War, and until about 1980, that prosperity was really being shared. In fact, the bottom 20% was growing. So the rising tide lifting all the boats, as they say, did happen in that period of time. But from 1980 onward, that really shifted, just as she's saying, really shifted. So the euphemism that you've heard is also true. The rising tide now lifts the yachts and not the boats. So I heard a stat the other day, Simone, that just struck me. We live with stats in this town, and so sometimes you get kind of immune to them. But this one, the increase, just the increase in wealth, of the top 0.1% from Oxfam, just their increase in wealth in the last year of the billionaires would be enough to end extreme poverty in this world, $1 a day, UN, 4 times over. Now, I was so struck by that, the extreme wealth. Now, how can anyone seriously be worried about taxing those people more when it's that kind of disparity in the world? I think the Bible is even more passionate about inequality than poverty. When it's really inequality, it's fundamental injustice, when some people are doing so well and others are doing so poorly. So I'm out with a pastor at food stamps, for example, she mentioned. I'm with a pastor, conservative guy, nice guy, decent guy. Jim, I'm worried about this, this dependency. I mean, I'm worried about this.
Yeah, right.
And I said, really, what are you worried about? Well, those food stamps. I said, well, Pastor, do you know any families personally in your parish that get food stamps, like Billy? He said, well, I've heard a lot of things. Do you know any of those families? He said, well, no, but I've heard a lot of things. I said, do you know, Pastor, that literally almost all the people who get food stamps are working, as Simone said. They have jobs, at least one full-time wage earner, and they have kids. They have jobs and they have kids, and yet they don't make enough to get their food on the table. And the food stamps are usually for a period of time. They're not lifelong. He said, you should get that out.
We're trying.
You should get that out. So, yeah, getting out these sort of facts and then talking about them biblically or theologically or by our faith is really important. That's how people change.
Amen.
It's funny. This organization has sponsored a food stamp challenge 3 different times in the last few years. Once was a big interfaith effort where 13 Congress members and thousands of people took it. Many didn't even know they were doing it through this interfaith effort.
Right.
And we just did it this last year from September through, we let rabbis and cantors have any time they want to do it from September to the end of the year. And 150 rabbis or cantors took it, and almost 1,000 of their congregants supported them in one way or another to give money for poverty. But because I lead the organization, I've had to take it all 3 times, and I can tell you, it isn't fun. It's nothing one would do.
It's hard work.
Because it's not going to kill me, but it's also nothing one would do because they just want to have a good time. If you do this, you're really struggling to get through it, and it's not as you said, it's a big boon to the economy, but it puts a lot of money right back into the economy, and the people that are doing it are not loving doing it in general. I mean, so it's sort of a stupid argument that people, it's not. I don't like using the word stupid because I'm sure the people that say these things actually feel it or believe it, or your pastor says it. I'll be honest. We had rabbis who were telling us they were on the food stamp challenge, and it wasn't one rabbi wrote me, she said, I'm 70 years old and I'm on food stamps in Houston. So it's not, it's nothing that anybody wants. And those that really put this kind of pressure against these poverty programs are ridiculous. And I do agree with you. I mean, about the need to find more ways to get revenue, and that billionaires aren't going to suffer no matter what we do.
Member Congress told me he did this thing, and
which one?
And well, several did, but they said what really changed their minds was they decided to shop themselves.
Yes.
Not have their aide bring in, nice beans and rice,
And think it was a miracle.
Yeah. But they had to shop in a grocery store with that budget.
With real cost.
And it was really, really very startling how difficult that was.
See, I think that touches on something that's really important, is that what has happened is that the wealthy have gotten so far away from the lived experience of ordinary folks that if you don't know somebody who's struggling, you don't know somebody who's lost a job, you don't know somebody on food stamps, and it's not exactly something you talk about, after service and all this.
Of course.
And so if you don't know someone, then it's easy to be judgmental. But knowing someone, trying to do the food stamp challenge, it's letting our hearts be broken by the reality that we're facing. And for me, this is, Walter Brueggemann is one of my favorite scripture scholars, and what he says that we're called to be the community that nurtures a prophetic imagination. What we're called to is to touch the pain of the world as real, not fix it, but touch it as real. Let it affect us. Let us know, let it break our hearts. And then he says that releases the active experience of hope. And it's that hope that creates community. But until we touch the pain of the world as real, we can be judgmental, inured, think we're special, do all this stuff that protects us from the real call of our people.
No, I think I agree, and I think that's what we that's what we need to do. And I think, I'm looking at you all and saying that when we do this again, which we will, because we're going to keep doing it till people aren't hungry in America, which means we're going to be doing it until we die. Hopefully all of you will do it, because I think that calling of actually walking a little bit in the shoes of the poor, it helps a little bit. It's not much, but it helps a little bit. I want to ask, sorry.
Can I just say, when I did the food stamp challenge, I live in a really mixed economic neighborhood here in DC, and I started asking for advice of folks in the grocery store, because I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I could eat for 3 days, but I had to eat for the whole week. And so I started asking help of, especially women with kids. And could you give me some advice on how to do it? People had it figured out. They said, well, where are your coupons? Oh, coupons, I hadn't thought about that. Where's this, where's that? But it created more connection for me. And so now when I see them in the grocery store, it's like, oh, hi, how you doing? But being willing to ask for help is something that folks who don't have the resources know they have to do. But those of us that have more resources, I haven't asked for help in a while.
It's a proximity question, which
is that's interesting.
It's a proximity question, which really is at the heart of it. It's not so much bad people, good people, it's proximity. And this society is more and more divided along economic lines. I remember when we first came to Washington, we moved into a really tough, poor neighborhood, and these kids were on the sidewalk. And they said, can we help you move your stuff in? And we said, sure. And they said, well, we want one thing. We want the mattresses, the old mattresses that are probably in this house. And sure enough, there were like 20 or more old, nasty, imagined mattresses in this house. The kids wanted the mattresses. So having the mattresses removed, we thought, well, that's pretty cool as well. That's all they wanted. So then they invited us down 2 nights later to this alleyway where they'd set up all the mattresses and they were doing acrobatics on the mattresses. And they called themselves the Afrobats, right? And one of the kids won a city gymnastics championship from the mattresses. And then we got tutoring the kids with their homework and stuff, and then one day they said, we're gonna have to move, and mom says, this is like 11 kids under the age of 14. And why? Well, she says, so they sent her a letter saying she had to move, right? It was illegal, but poor people get letters with some money, here's some cash to move. They'll move because they're going to lose in court, they feel like. So I knew nothing about housing law in DC. But I went to see Lillian and I said, let's look at this. And it was wrong. So I went to court with Lillian. Just a white guy showing up to stand alongside this black woman. They dropped the case, right? Just dropped the case.
They were like shocked.
Shocked. Dropped the case, and she went home. And that was, we kept the house. Till he came by, Ronnie said, we got to leave now because there was a rat in the crib with Isaac, which is the baby. And Teresa, 13-year-old, pulled him out in time. But Lil wants to move because of the rats. So we went in, literally with boots and bats, baseball bats, to go after rats. And there was rats on the counter that were like cats. Cats.
Too much information.
You know? And they just wouldn't even be scared. So they had nowhere to go, so they moved in with us for a year, right? 11 kids and Lil and Fred for a year. And I had studied all this stuff in college. I knew it well. But there's nothing like proximity to teach you what the experience of real life families are. And too often, we who care about justice, we really often don't have the proximity,
You're right,
as Simone's saying, to the people who are poor. And that teaches us more often than just our knowledge of issues does.
Amen.
So how do we re-engage in terms of proximity with people who are struggling?
It's interesting. The first time I took the food stamp challenge, I went shopping with 2 food stamp recipients.
Oh, that's good.
A Latina woman who showed me how to buy rice. She showed me the cheaper rices that were in bigger bags, and an older white guy who looked at me and he said, as we were going through a store in Deep Harlem, FRAC had set this up, the Food Research Council. He says, "Steve, I have to tell you something." And I said, "What?" He said, "It costs more for us." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "We don't tend to be vegetarians like you are. We like meat." And at that moment I realized being a vegetarian can even be,
If you want fresh, it's really a problem.
really, if you want. I want to, before we open this up to questions, I want to just talk for a minute about, really a minute, because I do want questions, and we need to do that, interfaith relations. And are there any stumbling blocks and challenges? I'll tell you just a funny story to start it off. About a year ago, I saw Sister Simone at something, and I walked up to her, and I was trying to do an interfaith letter on the present crisis in Sudan. Melanie, you and Martina would like this. It was a letter we gave to Hillary, sent to Hillary and the president. I walked up to her, and I said, "Sister Simone, will you sign this letter? I'm trying to get so-and-so." And she looked at me, she said, I got to check it out. She said, "But I'll tell you what." She said, "I'll probably be able to sign it." And then as I walked away, and she didn't know how true this was, she looked at me and she went, "I love it when you all want to get a cardinal and you got to settle for a nun." And she was actually right, because I won't mention the cardinal, but he was actually trying to get the permission to sign it and couldn't. So just a minute on that and why it matters and what the challenges are sometimes to do it. And then I think you all can start getting ready to ask questions, because I'm sure some of you have them. But Jim, do you want to talk on that for a sec?
On the interfaith?
On the idea of what's the challenges to it?
I think again, I'll go back to the proximity. I remember we had a demonstration outside the halls of Congress over a previous budget, but this isn't the first time we've had bad budgets. And so we had this vigil and sit-in inside the Capitol. And it was mostly Catholic sisters and some of us pastors. And a rabbi said to me, "Could I join you?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great. In fact, you could read the text. It's Isaiah." So he read the text, and we were all arrested and put in jail, DC jail. And Tony Campolo and this rabbi in jail were having this discussion about Jesus, who Jesus was, and it was a great theological discussion, about Christology, right? And I looked at that, I said, this is great. This is the pattern. Get arrested together and discuss theology in jail. This is really a great pattern for interfaith relationships.
Using opportunity.
Yeah.
Do any of you all have questions? Because if not, we can keep. Oh, there are. Robert has a question. Just come to announce yourself. Don't make a speech, because we got enough speakers up here as it is. And tell where you're from, and then ask all or whoever. If it's specific, it's even better. whoever you want to ask a question of, ask it. So Robert, you can start.
Robert Cohen, JCRC Director in Detroit. One brief comment and then a question. Brief comment. What wasn't said, although I think it was inferred, is that when an interfaith lobbying group goes into a legislator's office, that carries a degree of moral weight that is different from any other lobbyists.
Amen.
And so that's one of the chemistries that take place when you have interfaith advocacy. My question for Reverend Wallis, do you know if there's been an effort to get the evangelical community to engage on the issue of gun violence? And is that a tactic that our community could use and we could work together on?
Well, to underscore your first point, on Friday with the president, it was very apparent. What he said was, what Obama said was, this issue of immigration, of course, is political, like all issues are in this town. There was an election, and the Hispanic vote was decisive, and it changed the whole conversation. Republicans have to pay attention out of that. That's partly why we're winning. But he said the other reason we're winning on this is because of the moral issues that are being raised. And an interfaith, that he said, and you all, this interfaith delegation, you are the ones who are articulating that moral issue. And we're only going to win this if there's a moral issue that's articulated. So I think that's crucial to the whole thing. On guns, I think pastors, clergy, and parents are going to make the critical difference here. Pastors, clerics are supposed to bury old people, not kids who've been shot. Kids are supposed to bury their parents, not the other way around. Now it's turning around. We're thinking about putting 6,000 crosses on the mall, planting them during the gun debate, because that's how many people we've lost this last year. Overwhelmingly people of color from urban places. Evangelicals have taken some surveys, and I think they've been pretty hopeful to me about how many evangelical, particularly pastors, are feeling this very strongly. So we've gotten pastors, about 1,000 already, to sign a very strong statement. Now a statement's coming out from the Newtown clergy, interfaith clergy in Newtown, have written a statement that we're going to put together and get hopefully thousands of pastors and rabbis and imams to sign. And I think clergy could transcend this debate and play a critical role here by speaking as, in fact, people who are responsible for their parishes, for their communities, for their cities.
Can I add to that? I was in Chicago yesterday, and Chicago's had this whole spate of gun violence that is just kind of like the last straw. But I was at a Lutheran church, and they were talking about that some of their members had gone to a funeral just a few days before in an African American community that they've partnered with for a very long time. But what they discovered was that the African American community was pretty inured to the grief because they have experienced it so much. And we got talking, and that maybe a role of that interfaith dialogue piece, the way the Pittsburgh folks were recognized, a piece of it is that maybe some of us need to hold the grief so that that we can grieve with them, so that they can see that this is not the norm, and let their pain be able to be vented or expressed, and to step back from this chaos that has become normative, that they've had to inure themselves. And one last story is that we met on the bus, we met in Philadelphia, a woman whose son, a 17-year-old son, had gotten caught in a crossfire. And she, in her grief, took her grief to try to create an alternative for students in middle school, boys in middle school, to create an alternative way to deal with anger and violence. And it's basically a meditation class. And these kids are all excited. They said, you want to see her? You want to see it? Want to see it? They take us into the room, bring out their little rugs out of their cubbies. They sit on the floor. They have those electric candles, you know, because they couldn't light their own candle. So they open and turn on their electric candle, put it in the front, and they put on quiet music, and we think peaceful thoughts. Then we think angry thoughts, and then we think peaceful thoughts. And I was thinking, what a wonderful thing to do with grief, to try to give some new skills to open this up. I mean, it's so important that we try everything. And then I think, this is my humorous side, that, well, what the Constitution does is give everybody a right to bear a musket. And that's what we ought to protect. So you could carry a concealed musket if you can, if you can do it.
You know, the three signature issues that JCPA will work on this next year are obviously the budget. There's no choice but to do that, and immigration and gun violence. And so as you want or need, and I know with some of these we're working with other Jewish organizations like the National Council of Jewish Women and certainly the RAC, certainly David Zapperstein's group, just let us know, because this is where we want to be. But now, Rabbi Kaufman, I think on this side, we're going to go, and then tell who you are.
I'm Rabbi Jan Kaufman from the Rabbinical Assembly, and we took this food stamp challenge very seriously. We started a Facebook page. We had many rabbis and cantors and congregants do it. And I want to ask a question about the power of community, because one of the big questions we had, I think this is silly, but it's the question of Kiddush. On Saturday morning after services, many synagogues serve a light meal. Can you eat at that meal if you're doing the food stamp challenge? If you go to a bris, can you eat? You know, if somebody invites you to dinner, can you eat? And some people said, no, you know, you can't eat because you're on the food stamp challenge. And other people said, this is the power of community. If I'm part of a community, of course I can eat. And my question is, how do we leverage this power of community and not like let the government off the hook? Because many of our synagogues, churches have food pantries. Some get government support, some don't. But I want to try to see if there's a way that we can use this power of community, let people eat at Kiddush, let people eat at a bris if they're part of a community, encourage them to become part of a community so they can have some of these advantages. Like synagogue isn't only about praying. A lot of people come a half hour before Kiddush, and use that to convince the government that they're not off the hook.
Well, two things come to my mind is that those opportunities are actually missionary opportunities to even share the fact that, oh yeah, I'm taking the food stamp challenge and it's really hard. So, but I know that low-income folks really take advantage when there's free food. So if you're doing the food stamp challenge and being faithful to the low-income experience, you'll eat. And you'll try to take home leftovers. But I also want to say that, again, it comes back to proximity. Who are you close to? Who do you know? And how do we talk about this? When I was practicing law, I did a lot of family law, and I had this one beloved client. I just loved him. He just made me laugh, but boy, was he trouble. He had not been able to have visitation with his daughter for a very long time. He finally was getting unsupervised visits, and I'm going over it with him. You have to know he was a homeless guy. And, well, he had done a lot of planning. And I said, well, what are you going to do for lunch? Because you're going to have her for lunch. And I said, are you going to take her to McDonald's, thinking that's low income? And he says, I'm not going to feed her that kind of stuff. That's not good for her. And I thought, oh, that's good. He's been paying attention to nutrition. So I said, well, what's your plan? I'm going up to Montclair, which is a fancy part of Oakland, anybody from the Bay Area. I'm going up to Montclair and named a restaurant. And I said, well, how are you going to deal with that? I mean, how are you going to do this with this restaurant? Oh, the dumpster has great stuff, really healthy. And I thought, oh my heavens, what do I know? Here he is planning how he's going to provide healthy food for his daughter. And wow. What do I know about my judgments about what he should do? And that proximity says there's a lot to be learned from the innovation, from the knowledge, from the engagement. And I don't know, but I think there is a way in which we can use this to spread the word.
You got anything?
There's sometimes when I'm in front of a Christian audience, I'll say, what's the most famous text about the poor in the Bible? Just a little quiz. And Simone, every single time I've done that, the audience responds, the poor you'll always have with you. Now this is a minor text. Here's Jesus, at the home of a leper, not the Chamber of Commerce guy. And this woman has anointed him with oil, and the disciples are kind of critical of this waste of money. It could be spent on the poor and so on. And what he says is, he says, but the poor you will always have with you. What the language there says, really, it says, you'll always be with the poor because you're my disciples. Look who we're with here. Look who we're always with. You'll always, it's a Deuteronomy text that goes back to stand among the poor with your hand open, right? He says, you'll always be with the poor because you're what my disciples. This woman's offering her worship here. So he's saying don't be so politically correct. She's offering her worship here. Dorothy Day loved to worship, and then she could go serve the poor. What happens when people of faith are no longer in proximity to the poor? They get the text wrong.
Interesting.
They get the text wrong, and now they say it means there's nothing you can do about poverty. The poor will always be with you, meaning there's nothing really you can do. That's always going to be a problem, right? Now, in an affluent American church, that is the most famous text about the poor because it helps them get off the hook.
Right.
And it misses the whole point. They're getting the text wrong because they're no longer, as Jesus assumed, with the poor.
Right.
In the middle.
Let me just move to the next thing by just saying two quick things. We're gonna let all four of you ask questions, and then the two of you can respond. But just quickly, there's the Deuteronomy text you're talking about starts out with by saying there shall be no poor people among you. And then at the end, after God tells the Israelites how they have to treat the poor, they have to be open, they can't, the Shemitah year and in the Jubilee year, they can't withhold, they have to do all this stuff. And then God says, as if the first sentence was about the Messianic period, and then God says, but there will always be poor among you. It's almost this counterintuitive thing. And it's actually, there shall be no poor among you is actually one of the names of our anti-poverty campaign. And just to go back to Jan's question, Jan, I think you do much better, since I've done this a lot, I think you do much better at just not eating at those occasions and letting people know why. Because if you eat, then first of all, in my view, I'm a kind of mock-mirror Reconstructionist Jew, meaning a very strict Reconstructionist Jew. And I wouldn't do it because it just seems like I'm missing the point for 1 week. Yeah, cheating. Let's have the two questions from the right and have quick answers.
Not necessarily political.
Not the political right. I know that if I see Maxine. And then two questions from the left, and then these are the four questions we'll have, and then we're going to close up shop because we got to move on to the next thing. So the two of you start and say both your names and your city, and then we'll answer.
Thank you. I'm Lindsay Mintz. I'm the CRC director from Indianapolis. I think if this room was filled with high-income, white, evangelicals from any religious persuasion, and they heard these stories, and they felt the pain, and they thought about proximity, and they heard everything that we're hearing today, I feel like the disconnect is that at the end of the day, they say exactly why the churches need to be doing more. This isn't the job of government. And so that's where I find I can have a really meaningful conversation with my counterparts in an interfaith dialogue about these things, and they love when I use my theology, and I find that language that resonates, but that's where the disconnect happens, which is, so you think government should fix the problem, and I think my parishioners should fix the problem. So that's my question, is how do we bridge that disconnect? How do the parishioners, the congregants in this congregation that you refer to at the end, who are reading this text completely wrong because they don't have the proximity, how do you then say, you know, where's the proximity? How do you get connected?
Good. Maxine, you go ahead and make the questions as short as you can, because I can just see time is where
My name is Maxine Richmond, and I'm from Rhode Island, and I co-chair a very successful statewide coalition of interfaith leaders of all multi-faiths and also of advocacy groups on the full range of poverty issues. As you know, we're concerned about all the vulnerable. I want to ask you a question about our most vulnerable. Those people who are on the old, what we call welfare system or cash assistance. How do we help them move to economic security when their allotment of cash from federal government is a little bit over $550 per month for the last 20 years and not changed? And when there is such limited funding for job retraining. Thank you, and it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Go ahead, you two. Why don't you go ahead and
can I respond?
Yeah, we'll just respond because
quickly. Okay, role of government. It's the key fight of our time. What is the role? Bread for the World figured out that just for food stamps alone that Paul Ryan was proposing, not counting the ones in the Farm Bill, food stamps alone, the cut he proposed would require every church, every synagogue, every mosque, every house of worship in the United States, every single one of them, to raise an additional $50,000 every year for 10 years just to replace the money that he's talking about. It's not possible. The problem is that with low wages and with the level of poverty right now in the United States and the income disparities, is that it's too big for churches. The other piece that's not noted is that churches often, and Catholic sisters especially, not especially, but Catholic sisters are a part of this, take government funding and leverage it with donations, all this kind of stuff to make good programs. And finally, TANF to economic security, holy moly, that's the big question, $150,000 question. The fact is, temporary assistance for needy families works in an expanding economy. In the 90s, it helped people move to jobs. The problem was those jobs were minimum wage jobs that have nowhere to go. And the fact is, it's a failure of the program in a down economy because there are no low-wage jobs to get into. We have to revisit it, but it's going to be the toughest one. If we're having trouble with food stamps for the working poor, TANF is going to be a huge issue to take on.
Very quick, two things. One, the Bread for the World study also showed, get this, now all the food pantries, all the churches, feeding programs, soup kitchens, all of that, of all the faith communities, all of that provides 6% of the country's nutritional needs. Right. 6%, okay? So there's a factual question, but I think at a deeper level with the evangelicals, it's, again, what does the Bible say about the role and purpose of government? I've got a whole chapter in this new book on the role of government. I think Simone's right. That is going to be the key question. And it's clear from the scriptures, Isaiah all the way through Romans 13, that in fact part of the role of government is to care for the poor, to make sure the poor are having their needs met. That's a biblical argument I can make to evangelicals. When they say it's our role, not government, that's not a theologically credible statement. That's a political statement. Right. They're just right-wing Republican Tea Party people. But again, to what the Bible says, and what Bible says can change our hearts and minds. So there's a biblical role here. But I want to say one more thing. We are making a mistake, liberals and the left, if we think that just supporting safety nets, which I'm fighting to support the safety nets, fighting for safety nets will not overcome poverty in this country. We've got to replace poverty with opportunity. We've got to really talk about living wages. We've got to talk about how to help people lift themselves out of poverty and not just survive. These safety nets are basically survival. But for people who are even getting food stamps, as you've heard us, they're just kind of just getting by with the food stamps. So we can't be content just to defend safety nets. We have to talk about what it will require of us to really overcome poverty in this country, and that's more than just safety nets.
The last just two questions from over here. And then
Howard Friedman, Atlanta. I found that a different kind of proximity interferes with convincing people to support food stamps. Everyone seems to know someone who owned a small grocery store where food stamps were sold in the parking lot and used for beer. How do you counter these anecdotes of abuse, particularly when the budget is cutting enforcement staffs?
Okay, easy.
Abby, you have the last question. Abby is the new head of the Jewish Justice Roundtable, which is a group of a lot of our groups that are trying to come together to really, we're going to really focus on immigration through the roundtable this year. But Abby, go for it, and then we'll get the.
Steve played a huge role in helping to establish the roundtable and leads it in a remarkable way. And my question is very simply, what can we as a Jewish community do to work with you and help enact just immigration reform this year?
And can I ask, as you answer these questions, to sort of also do your closings of sorts and speak for a while? I mean, we have a couple sorts, but whatever. You never close. This stuff never ends.
Food stamps first. Those are old-time stories that don't know what's really going on. The fact is, electronic benefits right now, what people do for food stamps is you get a card. You can't sell your card because you also have to provide an ID at the time that you use it. In the old days, they were books of stuff and you could sell it. This has not been true for at least 10 years, so we need to change the urban myths out there. You can't sell them. Unless you have a face transplant or something and can look like your photo ID. And the Affordable Care Act doesn't cover that. The second, what can we do to work together? And I think that what we're going to do at Network is to do an anniversary of Nuns on the Bus. But what we're going to do is for immigration reform, and it would be really cool to share that, because our idea is it's not just about nuns, it's about the 100%. We all need to bridge these borders of our cities the way we've talked about with proximity. And what we want to do is start at Ellis Island and say it's about all of us. And then to come down the eastern seaboard and then cut across the south, because there's some missionary work that I understand needs to be done in the south. And so...
And we Southerners we're looking forward to it.
I know. We're going to wander Texas the way we wandered Ohio last time, but I have to raise the money for it, so that'll be a help. But to partner so that we're all in this together. And I think that the key piece is, the challenge is that these issues touch our hearts because of faith, but it also touches our nation because it's undermining who we are as a society to be what I call the unpatriotic lie that we're based in individualism. And that unpatriotic lie has been shared in order to protect the wealth of the few that they've seen as something good. I know they bring goodwill to it, but it is a very narrow perspective that has shifted wealth to the top. And I call on us to be patriotic and to speak up for the fact that it is all about we the people. I come at this from my faith, you come at it from your faith. But where we meet is in the Constitution, and it's we the people of the United States forming a more perfect union. And it's never going to be perfect. Lord knows we have a lot of work to do. But the fact is that in our pluralistic society, this experiment in democracy says everyone's voice is needed at the table. And what I love about the Constitution, it doesn't say we the citizens, we the landowners, we the super rich people, or even we the politicians. What it says is we the people, all of us together, trying to come together to make a difference. So I encourage you to keep up your good work. Make sure that we're in this together. Make sure that you're doing your piece of missionary work, and just the way I have my missionary work in the Safeway grocery store line, talk to others about it. We've lost our capacity to have civil rhetoric or civil conversation in our country about these really important issues. And so I think the place that we can make a difference, the place where I think it really is the most important, is being an ordinary person in our society willing to talk about the important things of our time, willing to speak from a place of value, what I care about, and willing to listen to what other people say. And if we are willing to speak of God, our image of God, our understanding of our country and our love of family, then I think we can come together and find new ways forward. Thank you.
Amen to that. Two ways where Jewish perspectives are critical. One, I've got this young African-American senior staffer, Lisa Sharon Harper, and she is just enamored with the word, the term, the notion, shalom. She has just, that's all she's talking about. Shalom, she's figured out, is not just about peace, as you know. It's about restoring broken relationships.
Right relation.
It's about putting things right again. Things have gone wrong. It's about putting things right again. And that, to me, is the biblical notion of justice. It's making things right. It's deeper than human rights or something. It's making things right again. You can't just keep rescuing women and kids from modern slavery, sexual slavery. There's more slaves today than when Wilberforce freed the slaves 20 years ago. You've got to deal with what's causing that. Why is this growing and growing and growing? You've got to deal with how do you make things right. So the more you can stress that notion of shalom, it's so powerful. It's one of the most powerful biblical images and it's winning over, you know, this young African-American evangelical who's just, and she's writing a book on shalom, you know. That's critical. On the immigration question, again, why this is working and sequester isn't is because momentum outside of Washington has impacted Washington on immigration. We called it Bibles, Badges, and Business. We brought faith leaders, law enforcement officials, and business people to Washington. And we got audiences with everybody. And they all, from Lindsey Graham to Chuck Schumer, they all said to us, we can't do this without your help from the outside. Inside Washington is totally dysfunctional inside this town. It's got to be what happens outside Washington is critical to changing Washington. And if we can pass immigration reform, that will not only help lift 11 million people out of fear and poverty, but it'll be the first time in a long time that anything bipartisan for the good was done in this town. And they actually quietly, they say, we'd love to do something good for a change. We'd love to do something together for a change. They're saying, could you, they're almost saying, could you hold our hands and help us do this? Right. They argue about government instead of governing is what they're doing, right? So if we can pass immigration reform, it could even affect other issues. It could even impact some other things. So again, I mean, the Jewish community, you know what it means to be a stranger. You know what that means. And you have a perspective on this that could educate the whole country. The danger with immigration, it's always, people say, it's always us and them, you know? Us and them. The mistake is thinking about the us, you know? Who is the us? And the Jewish community knows what it means to be a stranger. And so that clear biblical imperative about how we treat the stranger, God's saying, love God, love your neighbor, and love the stranger. Amen. So the Jewish community, I think, could play a critical leadership role here in passing immigration reform, helping to educate the rest of the country about why this is so important. Because on a global scale, beyond the Constitution, we are not just Americans, you know. On a global scale, you know what it means to be part of a larger global community. And Christians ought to know that too. But most Christians are more American than Christian, you know, to be honest. So how do we together combine the power of our faith communities to change public life? That's, I think, where we are now. Amen. And the more we are, who we say we are, two things happen. I'll close with this. When people of faith, I love this, when people of faith actually do the things their faith says it believes in, when we actually do those things, two things happen. People are surprised, and then they're attracted. Let's surprise them and attract them. Amen?
Amen. Can we all stand up and just applaud these two great people that showed up today? You can sit.
And you for putting it together.
Thank you so much.